Emily couldn't shake the feeling that her life was becoming a cliché. A work conference in Las Vegas? It sounded like the setup to every bad romantic comedy she'd ever seen. But as she stepped off the plane and into the neon chaos, she felt an unexpected thrill. Maybe this trip was just what she needed. A break from the endless suburban cycle of PTA meetings, soccer practices, and a marriage that had become as predictable as her morning coffee. The city's glitz was intoxicating. Everywhere she looked, lights flickered and beckoned, promising 1,000 different adventures. Her colleagues were already deep into work mode, but Emily decided to take a detour to the hotel bar. Just one drink to unwind, she told herself. And that's when she saw him, Jake. He was all effortless charm and mystery, leaning against the bar like he owned the place. Emily couldn't help but notice the magnetic pull between them as they struck up a conversation. They laughed, shared stories, and before she knew it, they were several drinks in. The buzz of alcohol made everything feel a bit hazy, a bit unreal. Want to head up to my room? Jake's voice was smooth, confident. Emily hesitated. This was insane. She was a married woman with 2 kids, for God's sake. But there was something thrilling about the forbidden, about stepping out of her tightly controlled life for just one night. Sure, she heard herself say, almost as if someone else was speaking. The elevator ride up was a blur of nervous giggles and stolen glances. Once inside his room, all rational thought evaporated. The night was a whirlwind of passion and spontaneity. Emily felt alive, electrified by the moment, completely forgetting about her life back home. But reality hit hard the next morning. She woke up in Jake's bed, the sunlight harsh and unforgiving. Panic surged through her. What had she done? She slipped out of bed, dressed quickly, and left before Jake could wake up. The walk of shame was real, and every step was a reminder of her monumental mistake. The flight back home was torture. Emily's mind raced with what-ifs and guilt. How was she going to face Tom? He was a good husband, a great father. And she had just thrown all that away for one night of reckless abandon. She felt nauseous. Back in her suburban cocoon, Emily tried to bury the memory of Jake and that night. She threw herself into her daily routine, hoping the familiar monotony would help her forget. But the universe wasn't done with her yet. A few days later, the first text came. An anonymous number, a vague message about her trip. Her heart raced. How did someone know? She dismissed it as a prank, but then more texts followed, each one more specific and threatening. Panic set in. Who was doing this? Jake? Someone else? The paranoia was crippling. Emily became a bundle of nerves, jumping every time her phone buzzed. She couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. The guilt and fear were consuming her. She knew she had to figure out who was behind these texts before her entire life unraveled. But where to start? Jake was the obvious answer, but confronting him meant revisiting that night, and she wasn't sure she could handle that. Her mind kept racing back to that conference, the thrill of Vegas, the heat of Jake's touch. It was like living in a bad dream, one she couldn't wake up from. Emily's perfect suburban life was crumbling, and she had no idea how to stop it. And so, the cliché continued, except this wasn't a movie. This was her life, spiraling out of control, one anonymous text at a time. Emily's phone buzzed on the kitchen counter, the screen lighting up with another anonymous text. Her heart sank. Who knew that one impulsive night could spiral into this never-ending nightmare? She read the message, her stomach churning. I know what you did in Vegas. Everyone will know soon. Perfect, she thought, just what I needed. A one-night stand turning into a full-blown blackmail saga. She glanced around the kitchen, the mundane clutter of cereal boxes and unpaid bills grounding her briefly in the normalcy she was desperate to cling to. But normal was a distant memory now. She couldn't shake the feeling that Jake was behind this. After all, who else knew the sordid details of that night? But she had no proof. Just a gut feeling that this mysterious, charming stranger was not as innocent as he seemed. Emily decided she needed to know more about Jake. Google, her trusty ally, was a good start. Sitting at her laptop, she typed in, Jake Las Vegas, hoping for a miracle. What she found was far from reassuring. Shady business deals, rumors of manipulation, a trail of women who had mysteriously dropped out of sight after getting involved with him. Great, she thought, I've had a one-night stand with a professional con artist. Classic Emily. The texts were getting more frequent and more threatening. She couldn't live like this, jumping at every notification, waiting for her life to implode. She had to confront him. It was risky, but she needed answers. She found Jake at a bar downtown, his usual smirk firmly in place. "Emily, to what do I owe this pleasure?" he said, feigning surprise. "Cut the crap, Jake," she snapped. "I know you're behind those texts. This has to stop." He leaned back, seemingly amused. "Texts? What texts? I'm afraid you've got the wrong guy. But if you're being harassed, maybe you should look closer to home. People aren't always who they seem." His words left her more confused and scared. Was someone else involved? But who? Desperate, Emily hired a private investigator named Sam. If anyone could untangle this mess, it was him. Sam's findings were a punch to the gut. Jake had connections to a criminal organization and a history of blackmailing women. Emily felt her world tilt. This was so much bigger than she'd imagined. She was in over her head, and now her family was at risk too. As if things couldn't get worse, Jake contacted her again, this time explicitly threatening to ruin her life unless she paid up. "I know about your little pie friend," he sneered over the phone. "Pay me, or everyone finds out." Panic turned into a cold resolve. She couldn't let him win. She had to find something that would turn the tables. Breaking into his apartment was a long shot, but what choice did she have? She called Sam, explaining her crazy plan. Surprisingly, he agreed to help. They waited until Jake was out, then snuck into his apartment. Emily's hands shook as she rifled through drawers, searching for anything that could help. Finally, she found it. A stash of documents, photos, and a ledger that detailed his blackmail operations. Jackpot, she thought, but the thrill of victory was short-lived. The sound of keys at the door sent a jolt of fear through her. "We need to go, now," Sam hissed. They barely escaped, slipping out the back just as Jake entered. Back home, Emily pored over the documents. It was all there, proof of Jake's criminal activities. This was her ticket to freedom, to ending this nightmare. But as she looked at the evidence, one thought haunted her. If Jake was this dangerous, who else was involved? And just how far would they go to protect their secrets? Emily's life had turned into a dangerous game of cat and mouse, and she wasn't sure who the real enemy was. But one thing was clear. She wasn't going down without a fight. Emily's heart pounded like a drum in her chest as she and Sam bolted out of Jake's apartment, clutching the stolen documents. Run faster, damn it, she thought, adrenaline surging through her veins. The sound of Jake's angry shouts echoed behind them, and she didn't dare look back. They rounded a corner and ducked into an alley, pressing themselves against the cold, damp wall. Emily held her breath, praying Jake wouldn't find them. Minutes passed like hours, but finally, Jake's footsteps faded away. She let out a shaky sigh of relief. "We did it," she whispered, a mix of disbelief and triumph in her voice. Back at her kitchen table, surrounded by the chaos of family life, half-eaten breakfast cereal, school permission slips, Emily spread out the documents they'd taken. Her hands still trembled from the close call, but she forced herself to focus. There was a key among the items, small and nondescript. It had to be important. "What else is this bastard hiding?" she muttered to herself. The answer came quicker than she'd hoped. Among the papers, they found an address for Jake's office. "This key has to be for something there," Emily said, more to herself than to Sam. The prospect of another break-in didn't thrill her, but the need to end this nightmare outweighed her fear. Sneaking into Jake's office was nerve-wracking. Every creak of the floorboards made her flinch, convinced that at any moment, someone would burst in and catch them. But the key worked, revealing a hidden safe. Inside were more documents, enough to put Jake away for life, and photos. Dozens of them. Women, all looking terrified, all clearly victims of Jake's schemes. And then, one photo made her blood run cold. It was like looking in a mirror, but the woman wasn't her. It was someone else, someone familiar. "Holy crap," she breathed. "It's my sister. The sister she'd lost touch with years ago. The sister who had vanished without a trace." Emily's mind spun. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was personal. Jake had taken her sister too, and now she was determined to find out what had happened to her. Emily's relief at finding the evidence was short-lived. She got home to find Tom, her husband, sitting at the kitchen table, staring at the pile of incriminating documents. "Emily, what the hell is this?" he demanded, his voice a mix of anger and confusion. She took a deep breath, knowing there was no turning back. "Tom, I need to tell you everything," she said, her voice trembling. And she did. She told him about the one-night stand, the blackmail, the break-ins, and the shocking discovery about her sister. Tom's face went through a spectrum of emotions: hurt, anger, betrayal. But in the end, he just sighed and ran a hand through his hair. "Emily, you've really messed up," he said quietly. "But we'll figure this out together. We have to take Jake down." Emily felt a weight lift off her shoulders. She had feared this moment, but Tom's support, despite everything, gave her the strength to keep going. They were in this together now, and with the evidence they had, they could finally put an end to Jake's reign of terror. The next steps were clear but fraught with danger. They had to bring everything to the authorities, but Emily also needed to find out what had happened to her sister. Every minute counted, and the stakes had never been higher. She glanced at Tom, feeling a surge of determination. They were going to end this, once and for all. Emily could hardly believe she was compiling a case against Jake, the man who had turned her life upside down. She sat at the kitchen table, piles of papers and photos spread before her. Tom hovered nearby, his presence a steadying force. "Let's nail this bastard," she muttered, feeling a grim determination settle over her. With Tom's support, and Sam's relentless investigation skills, they started piecing together the evidence. Every victim's testimony added another nail to Jake's coffin. The stories were horrifyingly similar: promises, manipulation, threats, and then blackmail. It was a twisted pattern, and Jake was the spider at the center of the web. Then, out of nowhere, an unexpected ally emerged. Lisa, one of Jake's former associates, reached out. She was ready to spill everything in exchange for protection. "Well, isn't that a twist?" Emily thought, trying to mask her relief with a hint of sarcasm. It was the break they needed. Emily, Tom, Sam, and now Lisa, worked tirelessly to set a trap for Jake. The plan was risky but foolproof. Lisa arranged a fake meeting, pretending to have another potential victim for Jake. They wired the room with hidden cameras and microphones, ready to catch him in the act. The day of the sting operation was nerve-wracking. Emily's heart pounded as she watched the live feed from a nearby van. Lisa was perfect, playing her role with convincing desperation. Jake, ever the predator, took the bait. As he leaned in, whispering his threats, the doors burst open, and law enforcement stormed in. Jake's face twisted in shock and rage as he was handcuffed. "Gotcha," Emily whispered, a fierce satisfaction flooding through her. Jake's arrest made headlines. The media feasted on the scandal, exposing his criminal activities to the world. Emily felt a wave of relief but knew this was just the beginning. The trial loomed ahead, and she would have to face him again. The courtroom was a battleground. Emily sat in the witness stand, recounting her story under the relentless gaze of Jake's defense attorney. They tried to discredit her, painting her as a liar and a cheat. But Emily held her ground, fueled by the memory of her sister and the countless other victims. Each word felt like a step towards justice. Jake was smug, but as the evidence mounted, his confidence began to crack. Witness after witness testified, each one adding weight to the prosecution's case. Emily's heart soared when Lisa took the stand, her testimony a final nail in Jake's coffin. The verdict came after what felt like an eternity. Guilty on all charges. The words echoed in the courtroom, a triumphant chorus. Emily's eyes filled with tears. It was over. The nightmare that had started with one impulsive night in Vegas had finally come to an end. As she left the courtroom, Emily felt a lightness she hadn't known in months. She had won, not just for herself, but for her sister and all the others Jake had hurt. The road ahead would still be tough. There was healing to do, relationships to mend. But for the first time in a long time, Emily felt hopeful. She looked at Tom, who had stood by her through it all, and smiled. "We did it," she said softly. And for the first time, she believed it. Emily couldn't shake the feeling that there was still one loose end dangling precariously: her twin sister, Jessica. With Jake behind bars, the mission to find Jessica became her top priority. She couldn't rest until she knew what had happened to her sister. She dove headfirst into the search, chasing every lead, no matter how small or improbable. She traveled from city to city, following a trail that seemed to go cold at every turn. Each dead end gnawed at her resolve, but giving up wasn't an option. She met with people who had crossed paths with Jessica. Some remembered her vaguely, others not at all. It was like piecing together a puzzle with missing pieces. Frustration built up, but Emily clung to hope, driven by the thought of reuniting with her sister. Just when she was about to hit another wall, she reconnected with Sarah, an old friend from high school. They met at a small cafe, and over the nostalgic aroma of coffee, Sarah dropped a bombshell. Jessica had been living under a different name. She's been hiding, Emily, Sarah said, her voice low. She wanted to disappear completely. Armed with this new information, Emily's search took on a new intensity. The clues led her to a small, quiet town miles away from the chaos that had engulfed her life. She felt a mix of anxiety and anticipation as she knocked on the door of a modest house. When the door opened, and she saw Jessica standing there, the world seemed to pause. "Jess?" Emily's voice trembled. Jessica's eyes widened, tears welling up as she recognized her sister. The reunion was a whirlwind of emotions, relief, joy, and the bitter sting of the years lost. Jessica recounted her story, the horrors she had endured because of Jake. Emily listened, heartbreaking with every word, but also feeling a fierce pride in her sister's resilience. The days that followed were a blur of catching up and healing. Emily and Jessica leaned on each other, sharing their pain and finding solace in their renewed bond. They weren't just sisters, they were survivors, and they were stronger together. One evening, as they sat on Jessica's porch, Emily suggested they do more than just heal. "We need to help others, Jess. There are so many women out there who've been through similar hell. We can't let Jake's legacy be one of fear and silence." Jessica agreed, and together, they started a support group for women affected by blackmail and manipulation. It was their way of turning their pain into something meaningful, something that could help others heal. Back home, Emily's family began to adjust to the new normal. Tom, always the rock, became more involved in their mission. He helped set up the support group, offering legal advice and a steady presence. The strain on their marriage began to ease as they worked together, united by a common purpose. Emily felt a new beginning take shape. The past would always be a part of her, but it didn't have to define her. She looked at her family, Tom, who had stood by her through every storm, and Jessica, who had come back from the brink, and felt a swell of gratitude. They had been through hell, but they were rebuilding, piece by piece, stronger than ever. Emily's phone buzzed again, and she felt a familiar chill run down her spine. Another anonymous threat. She thought the worst was behind her, but this message shattered that illusion. "We know what you did. Jake was just the beginning. You'll pay." Fantastic. Just as life was starting to stabilize, here came another storm. She showed the message to Tom and Sam, her frustration barely contained. "I thought this was over. What now?" she demanded, her voice tinged with both anger and fear. Sam looked grim. "Jake was part of a larger network. We need to dig deeper." Emily took a deep breath, her mind racing. If there was more to this, she needed to know. She needed to stop it. "Then we go undercover." "I'll do it," she said, the resolve in her voice surprising even herself. Tom's eyes widened in concern, but he knew better than to argue. Emily was determined. They worked with Sam to create a new identity for her. It was risky, but it was their best shot. She became Emma, a woman down on her luck, looking for a way to make quick money. The transformation was unnerving, but Emily embraced it. She had to. The deeper she went, the more she uncovered. Jake's blackmail scheme was just a small piece of a much larger puzzle. The organization was vast, its tendrils reaching into places she never imagined. And then, the shocker. One of the key members was John, a close friend of Tom's. The betrayal stung, but Emily couldn't afford to let it shake her resolve. During a tense meeting with the organization's leaders, her cover was nearly blown. Her heart raced as she fumbled for a plausible excuse. Just when she thought it was over, John stepped in, diffusing the situation with a smooth lie. "Emma's with me," he said, his voice steady. The leaders nodded, suspicion momentarily eased. Emily breathed a silent sigh of relief. Later, John revealed his true allegiance. He was a double agent, working to dismantle the organization from within. "I couldn't tell Tom," he explained. "It was too dangerous. But now, we can work together." With John's inside information, Emily gathered crucial evidence. Every document, every recorded conversation brought them closer to the heart of the organization. It was a dangerous game, but Emily thrived on the adrenaline. Each piece of evidence was a step closer to bringing these criminals down. There were close calls, moments when Emily thought she'd been found out. One particularly harrowing night, during a high-stakes meeting, she felt the weight of suspicious eyes on her. Just as panic started to take over, John's timely intervention saved her again. He'd created a distraction, giving her the chance to slip away unnoticed. With enough evidence finally in hand, they prepared for a major raid. Emily, Tom, Sam, and John worked tirelessly to coordinate with law enforcement. The plan was set. The day of reckoning was near. Emily sat in her kitchen, the familiar hum of domestic life around her contrasting sharply with the chaos she was embroiled in. Her kids were doing their homework, Tom was making dinner, and yet here she was, about to take down a criminal organization. She allowed herself a wry smile. Just another day in the life, she muttered. The raid went down without a hitch. Law enforcement stormed the organization's headquarters, arresting key members and dismantling their operations. Emily watched from a safe distance, a mixture of relief and triumph washing over her. They did it. The threat was neutralized, and for the first time in a long while, Emily felt like she could breathe. The battle had been tough, and the scars would take time to heal, but she knew she'd come out stronger. She looked at Tom, who had stood by her through every twist and turn, and felt an overwhelming gratitude. As they drove home, Emily thought about the journey that had brought them here. From a one-night stand in Vegas to taking down a criminal network, it had been a wild, unexpected ride. But through it all, she'd found strength she never knew she had. And now, she could finally look forward to a future free from the shadows of the past. Emily's hands shook slightly as she gripped the steering wheel, the city lights blurring past in the night. The raid was about to begin, and her heart pounded with a mix of fear and determination. This was it, the final showdown. She glanced at John beside her, his face set in grim resolve, and felt a strange comfort. They were walking into the lion's den, but at least they weren't alone. Law enforcement swarmed the criminal organization's headquarters with military precision. The operation was a blur of flashing lights, shouted commands, and the ever-present threat of violence. Emily moved through the chaos, adrenaline sharpening her senses. She had one goal: find the leader and end this. She turned a corner and found herself face to face with him. The leader of the organization, a man whose cold eyes sent a shiver down her spine. Emily, he sneered, recognizing her immediately. Did you really think you could waltz in here and dismantle everything? Not think, Emily shot back. No. But then he dropped a bombshell. Your sister, Jessica, she was more involved than you think. She wasn't just a victim. She helped us. She was one of us. The ground seemed to shift beneath her feet. You're lying, she said, but doubt gnawed at her. Was it possible? Could Jessica have been coerced into this nightmare? In the midst of the raid's chaos, Emily found Jessica. Her sister's face was pale, eyes wide with fear and guilt. Is it true? Emily demanded. Were you helping them? Jessica broke down, tears streaming. I didn't have a choice, Emily. They blackmailed me, threatened to hurt you and the family if I didn't cooperate. I'm so sorry. The betrayal stung, but seeing Jessica's anguish, Emily understood. This wasn't just about right and wrong. It was about survival. Their bond, tested to the limit, wavered but did not break. Suddenly, the building shook with an explosion, and armed enforcers stormed the area. In the chaos, Jessica acted on pure instinct. She pushed Emily out of the line of fire, taking a bullet meant for her. Jess! Emily screamed, cradling her sister as the life drained from her eyes. Jessica's sacrifice turned the tide of the battle. Fueled by grief and rage, Emily fought back with renewed vigor. The enforcers were overwhelmed, and the organization's stronghold crumbled around them. In the aftermath, Emily stood amidst the wreckage, feeling hollow yet resolved. Jessica was gone, but her bravery had given them victory. Emily and Tom returned home, their lives forever altered by the night's events. They mourned Jessica, but also honored her by channeling their pain into purpose. They established a foundation to support victims of blackmail and extortion. Using their experiences, they offered help to those who felt as trapped and hopeless as Emily once had. The foundation became a beacon of hope, a way to turn their tragedy into a force for good. Months later, a letter arrived for Emily. It was from Jessica, written before her sacrifice. Her hands trembled as she opened it, tears blurring the words. Jessica wrote of her love, her regrets, and her hope that Emily would find peace. It was the closure Emily needed, a final gift from her sister. Emily folded the letter carefully, placing it in a box of treasured memories. She felt a deep sense of peace. The past had scarred her, but it had also forged a new path. She looked at Tom, their eyes meeting with unspoken understanding. They had been through hell and back, but together, they would keep moving forward, stronger and more united than ever. Emily stared at the ceiling, the darkness of the room pressing down on her. She turned to see Tom sleeping peacefully beside her. For a moment, she envied his ability to find solace in sleep. Her mind was a relentless storm, constantly replaying the events of the last year. Jessica's sacrifice, the dismantling of the criminal network, and the foundation they had built in her memory. Sleep wasn't an option with so much unresolved. Mornings were always a mixed bag. On one hand, there was the comfort of routine, coffee brewing, kids bustling around, the predictability of domestic life. On the other hand, there was the constant undercurrent of anxiety, the feeling that something could go wrong at any moment. She sighed and rolled out of bed, determined to face another day. Therapy sessions with Tom had become a regular part of their lives. It was strange at first, baring their souls to a stranger, but it had helped. They were rebuilding trust, brick by brick, learning to communicate better, and rediscovering each other. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. And progress was something Emily clung to. Sam's departure was bittersweet. He had been a rock through the chaos, a steady presence when everything else felt like quicksand. But it was time for him to move on, and Emily understood that. Their last conversation had been full of unspoken gratitude and promises to keep in touch. "We've got this," she had assured him, though part of her felt a pang of doubt. Returning to her job was both grounding and surreal. The office looked the same, but Emily was different. She tackled her work with a new sense of purpose and drive, her experiences shaping her perspective. She felt more resilient, more determined. Coworkers noticed the change, admiring her newfound intensity. They didn't know the full story, but they sensed something profound had shifted. The foundation, too, was growing. The community rallied behind them, offering support in ways Emily had never expected. Former victims of Jake's schemes came forward, sharing their stories and joining the cause. It was a powerful reminder of the impact they were having. Emily felt a mix of pride and sorrow each time she heard a new story of survival. Jessica's memory was the heartbeat of their mission, driving them to fight harder, reach further. The award ceremony was surreal. Standing on the stage, accepting recognition for her bravery, Emily felt a whirlwind of emotions. Gratitude, humility, and a touch of disbelief. She had come so far from that fateful night in Las Vegas. It was a poignant reminder of the journey she had been on and the strength she had found within herself. The applause was a chorus of validation, a testament to her resilience. But peace was fleeting. Just as she began to feel a sense of normalcy, an anonymous tip shattered the illusion. Another criminal network targeting her foundation. "You've got to be kidding me," she muttered, a mix of frustration and determination bubbling up. The cycle of danger seemed never-ending, but she wasn't about to back down. Emily rallied her team, preparing for the new threat. There was no time for self-pity or doubt. She had a mission, a purpose. And she wasn't going to let fear dictate her actions. She looked at Tom, who was by her side every step of the way, and felt a surge of gratitude. Together, they were stronger. Together, they could face anything. The challenges were far from over, but Emily was ready. She had faced the darkness and emerged stronger. And no matter what came next, she knew she had the strength to endure. She took a deep breath, steeling herself for the battle ahead. It was just another chapter in her story, and she was determined to write it on her own terms. Emily couldn't believe they were back in the thick of it. The anonymous tip had shattered any illusion of peace, throwing her once again into the chaos she thought she'd left behind. Sitting in their living room, she and Tom pored over the information, determined to protect their foundation and the victims they'd vowed to help. The more they dug, the more they realized how deeply rooted this new threat was. It wasn't just a continuation of Jake's schemes, it was something darker and more sinister. Emily's gut twisted as they discovered that a trusted member of their foundation was leaking information to the new criminal network. The betrayal cut deep, adding another layer of danger and mistrust to their mission. "Why can't things ever be simple?" Emily muttered, her frustration palpable. They needed to act, and quickly. Drawing from her previous experiences, Emily decided to go undercover once more. This time, she was more prepared, armed with knowledge and a fierce sense of purpose. She crafted a new identity, slipping into the role like a second skin. The new network was ruthless and cunning, and every day was a dangerous game. Emily navigated the treacherous waters with a mix of wit and nerves, constantly looking over her shoulder. As she delved deeper, Emily uncovered a chilling revelation. The new network was led by Jake's relative, seeking revenge for his imprisonment. The personal vendetta added a terrifying twist to the conflict. It wasn't just business, it was deeply, disturbingly personal. Back home, she and Tom devised a desperate plan to bring down the network. They involved law enforcement, using their foundation as bait to lure the criminals out. The risks were enormous, but they had no choice. They had to end this once and for all. The night of the showdown was tense. Emily and Tom fought side by side, their bond stronger than ever amidst the chaos. The battle was fierce, with both sides suffering losses. Friends and allies fell, and each casualty was a painful reminder of the high stakes they were playing for. When the dust settled, the new network was dismantled. The victory was bittersweet. They had won, but at a great cost. The emotional toll was heavy, and the scars ran deep. Emily and Tom emerged from the battle stronger and more determined, but the losses weighed heavily on their hearts. Despite the pain, there was hope. Their foundation continued to thrive, helping more victims and becoming a beacon of hope. Emily's story inspired others to fight for justice, to stand against blackmail and extortion. They honored those they had lost by continuing their work, knowing the fight for justice was never truly over. One day, Emily received a final letter from an anonymous supporter. It praised her courage and hinted at future challenges. She realized then that the fight against crime and injustice would always be part of her life. But she was ready. She had the strength, the support, and the determination to face whatever came next. Emily, Tom, and their children found a new sense of unity and purpose. They faced the future together, ready for whatever challenges awaited. Emily knew that while the past would always be a part of her, it didn't define her. She looked forward with hope, ready to continue her mission to protect and serve justice. As she stood in the doorway of their home, watching her children play in the yard, Emily felt a profound sense of peace. The journey had been long and hard, but it had made her stronger. And as she looked ahead, she knew she was ready for the next chapter. The legacy of their work would continue, inspiring others to fight for what was right. And that, she thought with a smile, was something worth fighting